if I was an expert on Indonesian basket weaving, then I would make a channel about Indonesian basket weaving and tell you how to do Indonesian basket weaving. And if you have a channel about Indonesian basket weaving and you're an expert on Indonesian basket weaving, I'm not going to come on your channel and and make inane comments like, "Oh, your shirt's wrinkled." No, I'm gonna recognize that you're the expert on Indonesian basket weaving, and learn something from you. But I'm not an expert on Indonesian basket weaving, so I don't tell people how to do Indonesian basket weaving. I don't even know if that's a thing. So I'm really dumb. I don't know much about much, except really only one topic. Okay, and it's a topic that I actually study. And at no point in time do I learn something new. Like I learn an idea and go, oh, that's it, and then I just stick with that. No, no, never once have I done that. I continue to have skepticism for everything. Even if something makes sense, I still have skepticism for it. And this is something that people do: is the very first idea that kind of halfway makes sense to them, they're impressed by it, and they stick with that. And that happens to everyone in all occasions, and you'd have to be really weird like me to not do that. I acknowledge it's something that most people just automatically do, and it requires a certain personality type, and also training, years of training. And I wanted to talk about near-death experiences a little bit. I wanted to go back to that subject of near-death experiences, because actually, the subject of near-death experiences is at the core of everything that I study, have studied, and will study. Because my personal story began with a near-death experience, and I've had the question, well, what happened and why did it happen? And apparently, no one has the answer to that. I agree that it is a hallucination. However, you can't just throw out the word hallucination and use it as a explanation. It doesn't explain shit. The very first thing I want to say about near-death experiences is that it's called near-death experiences, not death experiences. Okay? It's called that for a reason. And Dr. Raymond Moody is, I believe, the one who coined the term. And although he was one of the first people in the West in modern history to study such a phenomenon, he's not. Well, he doesn't have the I guess you could say, occult education that I have. He doesn't have quite the understanding. It's basically a miracle that he worded it that way, near-death experience. Of course, obviously, people who have had near-death experiences didn't die. No, none of them died. If you've had a near-death experience, you didn't actually die. If you're my heart stopped and it's clinical death. Oh, okay. No, you know what I'm saying. You didn't die. You didn't die, and you weren't resurrected. Okay. No one alive today has ever died, and therefore has never experienced death. And that was very obvious to. That's always been obvious to everyone. Having to do with near-death experiences. Very obvious. I recall a A few years ago at the Consciousness Conference, I recall a presentation done by a researcher about this. Before someone reaches death, there is, I remember him saying that there's it's like a spike, an increase in mental activity, brain activity before death. So there's a spike and then flatline death, in EEG. And the EEG, really what it is a measure of coherence. So there's actually a spike commonly before you die, there's a spike of coherence. And then after that, when you really die, then there's a drop off in coherence. So, and I do think that that is either similar to or the same thing as a near-death experience. The people dying are actually experiencing what a near-death experiencer experienced. I think it's very likely, because I see the near-death experience as an increase in coherence. So, every morning when you wake up, there's a moment in time when you regain your self-awareness and you realize that you're awake and you were asleep a moment ago. Now you're awake. Every morning there's this self-awareness that occurs. I'm awake. Okay, so one very common symptom of the near-death experience is this same self-awareness, but about waking consciousness. So it's as if you're waking up from real life, like real life is a dream compared to your state. Well, what happens when you wake up is that there's an actual increase in coherence in your brain, and therefore a raising of consciousness. And so therefore, if you went from the waking consciousness, normal waking consciousness, and increased coherence even more, then, logically you'd have the same feeling about normal waking consciousness. Wow, it's like normal waking consciousness is like a dream compared to the level of brain activity I'm at now. And what a lot of people do incorrectly is they'll take that experience and give it an idealist kind of analysis, which means that they see themselves as God that's dreaming up the entire universe. They see that experience as idealism, solipsistic, which is absolutely pathetic. I mean, if you want to just go through life and do things and believe things without having any reason for doing those things or believing those things, if you just want to go through life doing that and then die and that's your life, you can do that if you want. I'm not stopping you. It's just that I'm not going to do that. So you do you. And if you just want to hear lovey-dovey stuff, like you're the God of the universe, if that's what you want to hear, then go listen to someone else telling you that. But of course, if they're telling you that, then they probably think they're God of the universe. And they're just being polite. Yeah, so a near-death experience does not make you special in any way. Near-death experiences are extremely common, and they happen every single day all around the world. And no, you don't have special powers now that you had a near-death experience. No, you're not a perfect human being now that you've had the near-death experience. And I'm sorry to say it, but no, that's not what death is like. That's not what death is like. That's what near-death is like, maybe. But, one thing that's really unfortunate about the phrase near-death experience is that the near-death experience actually does not require any form of health problem or being near death at all. In fact, there are probably an infinite number of ways one can achieve the near-death experience. And I'm gonna basically lay it out for you, the numerous ways. So basically, a lot of religions, they focus around one or two of these ways, one or two ways to achieve basically an altered state of consciousness, with the end goal being a mystical or a beatific vision. Mystical meaning one with God, which is a monist term, and also beatific vision, meaning the same thing, which is a term I think the Eastern Orthodox and maybe even Catholics use it to refer to the near-death experience, or really highly altered states of consciousness that are similar. And the increase of coherence is associated with being closer to God, which is a reasonable statement, I guess. I mean, well, anyway, a lot of religions base their rituals and traditions off of one or two of these ways to achieve an altered state of consciousness, with the end goal being a mystical vision. Maybe one of the ways is, chanting and dancing around the fire for 7 hours straight. And in that culture, with those religions, the culture, maybe your religious leaders and your neighbors, they tell you that, oh, you should act this way. You should dance around the fire for 7 hours straight, because that's like a holy, sacred act. You should do that. And if they go into more detail, it's because that's one of the ways to achieve altered state of consciousness, to get to a mystical vision. But really, like I said, there's like an infinite number of ways one could go down. There's a bunch of paths you could take, and let me kind of lay it out for you. So, in your normal life, your bodily functions, you're going down this particular road with your bodily functions. What do I mean by that? Well, like, let's say you're feeling all right. You're going down this road, and you start to get tired. Okay, you're getting tired, and you're starting to go off the road. So you go to sleep. You take a nap, and okay, now you're feeling good again. You're feeling normal, and you go back on the road. And then let's say later you're getting hungry. You're starting to get hungry, so you're starting to verge off the path a little bit. So you have a snack. You get a snack, and you're back on the path. You're going down this path. You're kind of like a Sims character or something. You've got these bodily functions, these urges you got to take care of, and you're trying to stay down this normal path, bodily functions. Generally, the way I have understood it is that once you diverge off of that normal path, the highway, let's say, of bodily functions, that's when you start getting into altered states of consciousness. And you could use your imagination, really. You could come up with new ways of achieving altered states of consciousness. Some are safer and better and easier than others. But generally, that's the idea, is to take the off ramp, if you will. from the highway of bodily functions. Um, and So I'll give you an example. I'll give you my best example, my best example, and that actually comes from Dr. Moody as well. Interestingly enough, even though he never really made the connection, he never said, "Oh, the psychomantium can lead to a near-death experience." His two things, psychomantium, near-death experience, he never he never did that. And this is basically how I had a near-death experience. It's through this process of taking the off-ramp, diverging from the path. And there's basically 3 steps to it. The first step is complete relaxation in your body. So like, think of it as like, relaxing to watch a movie, except multiplied by 10. You just can't move any muscles at all. You have to really just ultimate relaxation, and you should be propped up in a comfortable way that you can lay there awake for several hours, really relaxed. Very, very comfortable reclining chair is probably the best. So that's step 1. Ultimate bodily relaxation. Number 2 is, so number 1 is like it has to do with, it affects your bodily sensations. You're diverging from the path of normal bodily sensations. Usually throughout the day, you're feeling things and you're moving around, and that's normal. And a way to diverge from that is to just relax and not feel anything. So that alters your sensations in one way. Another way, so step 2 to alter your sensations is to mess with your vision. And the way that they've always done it is like look into a black or obsidian mirror, or like a bowl of water in a dark room, but Dr. Moody's way, and he has a term for it. It's like clear darkness or something. I forget. Basically, what you do is you use a regular mirror. I think is the best regular mirror, which is kind of, it's in front of you. Doesn't really matter how far away, but it's angled up so that you're looking above your head. You're not looking at your own head, but it doesn't really matter because you're gonna be in a pitch black room anyway. And oftentimes, in conjunction with the mirror is some kind of flickering light source, like a candle is used, or a strobe light of some kind. By the way, don't do any of this. Don't try this at home. The strobe lights cause, flickering lights can cause what's the word? Seizures. Okay. So don't mess with the stuff, kids. Don't do drugs either. Just don't do it. There's actually no reason at all to do this, really at all. And if you think you're gonna like achieve some kind of mystical, you're not gonna achieve anything from that. It's basically a waste of time. That's my current view of it. Okay, so anyway, you're strobe light, clear darkness. So step 2 is basically you're gazing into the mirror, which is relatively close, but you're going to focus your eyes as if you're trying to find something in the distance, in the far distance, like there's something in the fog that you're trying to make out in the distance. So you're basically focusing your eyes and you're trying to find something in the fog, and eventually you will see the fog that a lot of scryers know about, looking through the crystal balls. It's the same kind of fog. So you're going to look through the fog and try and pick something out. And so step 3 is, I think, probably the most important and the most difficult, which is 100% complete, utter focus, mental focus. You're going to relax your body, but you're going to do the complete opposite with your mind. Because, normally throughout the day, your normal method of doing things is just, light amounts of sporadic focus on various things. With this, you're going to diverge off this way by focusing like you've never focused before on anything in your life. Mental focus. And there's kind of a debate on what you focus on. And after practicing this for many years, I realized that it doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is the focus itself, the intense focus, and you can actually shift your focus from one thing to another, and it could really be anything. It could be the thing you're looking at. It could be a sensation. I think that's probably one of the best things to focus on, is the actual sensation. And eventually you'll get this sensation of, it's kind of like vertigo. That's the vestibular hallucination, out-of-body experience sensation. What it's like is, if you've ever fallen in a dream or flown around in a dream, or if you've ever felt like you're spinning, vertigo. I think that's the word, vertigo. It's basically your body's not spinning, but you feel like you're spinning. And what helps a lot of people do this is imagine that they're kind of like rotating or spinning or flipping around, in some orientation. And focus on that with intense focus. And the more you focus on the sensation, you'll see that the deeper you go. It's almost like distinct levels of deepness. It's like from one moment you're here, and then boom, I just feels like you went to a deeper level. And it gets harder and harder to focus on that sensation. And but there's an end to it. There's an end. There's the deepest level, which I think will get someone to a near-death experience. And I'm not the only one to do this. This is like a thing in Buddhism. Apparently, someone's doing, some researcher in Europe is doing studies on this right now. He's getting Buddhist monks to do this, and really neat. It's really neat, and I'm trying to tell people that have near-death experiences, I'm trying to tell them, explain to them, you don't need to be near death. That's not what it's about. It's not about death. Okay, and they don't want to hear it. They just want to think that they got special powers and they're like gods of the universe, or whatever you want to believe. It's what it is an increase in coherence, which is literally the opposite of death. It is a reduction of death. It is a struggle against death, is what it is. If you see death as incoherence, which it obviously is. In the grand scheme of things, this is really basic information. And it's miraculous that more people don't talk about it and understand it in this way, which I think is most logical and correct. I mean, I basically read everything there is to read on the subject. And even experts on the subject have a hard time clearly stating these things, like in clear language. People really have a tendency to make it like esoteric and mysterious sounding and vague. It's like spooky language. Like in religions, they use spooky language because basically they don't really know what they're talking about, and they just hope that you're like impressed by their language and don't ask any more questions. Like, oh yes, spooky language. and and even though experts on the subject understand monism and like coherence and all this stuff, like they don't really state things clearly, and they use their own kind of esoteric, spooky language. And really, it's just people being edgy. It's like all the nerds, all the edgy nerds in the past writing about the subject. And don't get me wrong, I'm pretty edgy, and just, I'm not that edgy. I'm not that edgy. I'm not a dominant intuitive. I'm a dominant. My second trait is intuition. So that's why I'm not an expert on everything. I'm not an edgy intuitive nerd. Yeah. So another thing no one ever states this clearly is that there are multiple ways of looking at things ontologically, like monism, dualism, idealism, physicalism. There's multiple ways of looking at things. And therefore, they never clearly state, well, monism is correct, because, you have to get through that step first. Once you get through that step of clearly stating there are multiple ways of looking at things, once you get to that point, then it's like, okay, well, which one is the correct way of looking at things? Which is the correct way of looking at things? And I've literally never read anything where the author has clearly stated those things. Never ever read anything like that. And believe it or not, that is the core single problem with academia today. And all these attempts at alternatives to academia, same exact problem. All these smart people writing books in the past, no one ever does this. No one ever makes it so clear. And maybe in the past, like it's been taught in the past, and it's the way of looking at things has been more obvious to people in the past, so they never really needed to come out clearly and state it, because pretty much everyone knew what they were talking about. But today, no one knows what you're talking about. That's literally what postmodernism is. When everyone talks about how bad postmodernism, they don't know why it's bad, but they can't say why it's bad, but that's why it's bad. That exact reason. And what's the other word that goes with postmodernism? Deconstruction, or deconstructionism. It's the deconstruction of clear thinking, ontological, viewing things in different ways ontologically. That's the deconstruction. That's what's being deconstructed. And in the grand scheme of things, I think it's probably good that this era has happened. Of course, it's happened because of subversion by all of the major governments in the world on our culture, by the globalist governments for generations. And that's why postmodernism and deconstruction happened. That's why we're all confused. It's because of spiritual subversion on our culture for generations. And if we miraculously bounce back from that, then I think that will make our collective knowledge, our collective will stronger than it was before. It's but if we survive, and that's it's looking a little bit bleak, isn't it? Yeah, deconstruction is not good, but it could be a good thing, because we can emerge from the situation thinking more clearly and actually doing things and believing things while having a reason to do so. Just look around you at everyone in culture, everything everyone does, everything everyone believes. What's the actual? Do they have an actual reason for doing those things and believing those things? What's the context? What's the context of things that people do? What's the actual? All the time, I'm hearing people saying, "Oh, start a family, have kids. Stop worrying about stuff. Stop. You don't need context. You don't need to. You just need to do things. You just need to work at a job for 50 years. You just need to be a cog in the machine, and then you die. But at least you helped progress humanity. Congratulations." I'm really not cynical. I think I'm the least cynical. I'm the most optimistic person in existence. I just kind of have a righteous anger against evil and death. Can I do that? Is that all right? Huh? Okay. Wait a minute. There's a whole lot more that I wanted to say that I forgot to say. Okay. Wrote it down. All right. So first of all, it's okay to close your eyes during this process of the this I guess you could call it the psychomantium process. You could close your eyes. At a certain point in time, I closed my eyes after the vertigo, the kind of starts, the vestibular hallucination. I close my eyes and focus on that feeling. There's no real point in keeping your eyes open at that point. And I used the term vestibular hallucination just now because I think that's a pretty accurate term for that feeling of vertigo, that out-of-body experience feeling. And there's this lab that studies out-of-body experiences, and they're in Switzerland. I think it's run by some guy named Olaf, good old Olaf, and they I recall them being in the Nature magazine. I think that's what it's called. I'm not really impressed by any of that stuff, so I'm not. Yeah, so they study out-of-body experiences, but like on an extremely shallow level. Like especially compared to that one guy that deals with Buddhist monks and whatnot. Basically, Olaf and his lab, they basically they'll show an image to the participant, the not the subject, the participant. They show an image to the participant about, it's like bodies in different orientations or something. And then they basically have you lay down, and they say, look at this image and like imagine your body in this orientation, which is a different orientation than what you're in. And that's like a miniature version of this psychomantium process. It's like a very shallow version where they don't tell you to relax. They don't tell you to focus intensely. Ooh, it's kind of cold today. So they don't tell you to do all that stuff. They just tell you to look at the image and kind of imagine yourself in a different orientation. And they found that in these different scenarios where people do stuff like that, there's this part of your brain that increases in what I would call coherence. It increases in coherence. There's more activity in this particular region, which is called the temporoparietal junction. Say that 10 times fast. So, I would say that during the near-death experience, or like a very deep out-of-body experience, and that would mean a lot of coherence in the temporoparietal junction. All right, so I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but John Dee. Okay, John Dee. All right, so John Dee is some old guy who lived in the 1500s in England, and he developed basically the basis, the foundation for most esoteric societies, and basically developed this thing called vision magic, or what they call Enochian vision magic. It's basically kind of the basis for all the different permutations of vision magic in esoteric societies. And basically it's really complicated. If you're like a purist, then you follow the original Enochian vision magic system created by John Dee and Edward Kelly. Now, the thing about John Dee and Edward Kelly is that they are monists and Christians. And they understood that very obviously. They understood that, and they were dealing with the collective consciousness. That's how they looked at it, which is pretty obvious. And they wrote down a bunch of stuff about like the identities of angels and whatnot. And as you know, probably, angels exist as a hierarchy, like a self-similar hierarchy. And at no point did John Dee or Edward Kelly view it as, we're opening a portal and there are ghosts coming through. There's deceased spirits. No, they didn't view it like that at all. It's they actually viewed the process as causing a hallucination in themselves. Okay. Yeah, so it's not, you're not opening a freaking portal. Now the psychomantium system is basically like an extremely simplified version of Enochian vision magic, and my version is even more simplified than Dr. Raymond Moody's psychomantium system, which involved some rituals such as thinking about the target deceased loved one for the whole day, for hours, kind of focusing on whoever you're trying to contact. And I believe you do something like that in Enochian vision magic. However, there's a huge difference in the mindsets between the two. Moody viewed it as pretty much as opening a portal through which your deceased relatives come through as substantial ghosts. Whereas John Dee and Edward Kelly didn't view it like that at all. They're just dealing with angels, not. And you know, the Bible, I think, explains this pretty clearly. But Moody kind of marketed his system as dualist. It's like a portal where you can talk to your deceased relatives, which is unfortunately not how it works. Unless you want to prove to me that monism is incorrect and dualism is correct, then you know I'll hear that argument. Okay, so basically where I'm at now in my quest to understand the near-death experience, I have a particular number of questions which are basically, I think, the same question. So what is the identity of the spirit? You could possibly view the near-death experience as kind of like, and in my case particularly, you could view it as like a message that was sent from a higher spirit or something, like a message, like you received a message. So the question then, if you believe that, then the question is, well, which spirit? You know, what is the identity of that spirit? And then, of course, you know, why did that occur? Another question is, what is the source of the vision? That's probably the biggest question in all of humanity. What's the source of that vision? Religions tend to go like this. They say, well, our prophets, the visions that our prophets got, that came from like God or whatever. But those prophets in that religion over there, that came from like Satan or the devil or something like that. And so the question is, what's the source of that vision? How do you know? When you have a vision, when that prophet has that vision, how do they know what the source is? And in the context of prophecies or visions, you know, what is it true? Like what you're seeing, is that reality? Is that a truthful thing, or is that just like imaginary BS? Basically, that's basically what I'm asking. Is it accurate, or is it just random fake stuff? And usually when someone uses the term hallucination, most people think, well, you're claiming that vision is fake stuff. But no, that's not it at all. That's not what the term hallucination means. But there is still a legitimate question of whether, you know, it's what you're seeing is accurate or a fake. That's the question. Is it accurate or fake? And a lot of people who have near-death experiences just assume it's 100% accurate and comes from God or whatever. And that's a question you need to ask yourself. Where does it come from? Where does this fit? What's the source of the vision? You know what I mean? And you just can't assume that. It's literally the biggest question. It's the hardest question to answer, I think. And people just assume, like, one way or the other. Oh, you had a vision, came from the devil. Oh, I had a vision, came from God. It's like, you don't know. Like, how do you know? And some people, have an answer to that question that's based on very shallow reasoning. Like, oh, well, I had a good feeling, so therefore the source was good. Okay. There's these things called lies. And I don't really understand, exactly the mind of, I can't really comprehend the collective mind. And, when you're in the near-death experience, it's not like you're getting all these answers, too. So it's everyone comes out of it with a different belief. Basically, it just reinforces whatever they believed beforehand. It happened to me. I was an agnostic. It reinforced my agnosticism. I'm not agnostic anymore, but that's what happens. So it's not like, again, for the 1 millionth time, you don't become like a deity. You don't become a god. You don't like get special powers. You don't suddenly receive the truth about the universe. Doesn't work like that. And so when you talk about so another possible question is, what path does it take through the hierarchy? Wording it that way, I don't know if it's kind of confuses things, because the collective mind requires brains. So things are generated by brains, but also everything emanates from the absolute, which is like supposed to be at that top. So is it going down or is it going up? I don't know. Kind of confusing. Basically, it's self-similar and hierarchical. That's it. All right. So when you talk about what's the identity of the spirit, when you view it as like, oh, there's, and I think this is kind of how they view it in Enochian vision magic. They're given some kind of information or message by a particular rung in the collective mind, or particular spirit. A lot of you hear a lot of times like people saying that the brain is like a receiver or something, like a radio receiver. That's that's not how it works. Okay. Because I'm making that claim because I'm basing everything I say off of monism, and that doesn't really seem to fly in monism. Possibly, in a kind of abstract way, you could make the argument that the brain is similar to both a transmitter and a receiver. That analogy has to do with the propagation of light and transforming light signals into other signals. And I don't know if there's any. I'm not sure what mechanism of the brain would do that. Of course, there's a potential. If you view consciousness as a field, then there is a potential possibly for the transmission of signals from the brain, like consciousness light or something. I'm not sure though. But if you're the kind of person who wants like an analogy that there's some kind of connection to like technology that we have now, then a better analogy is a bunch of tiny electromagnets wired together. And you know, a neuron would be kind of like an electromagnet, and they're all connected by wires, and when they're powered on, they are they increase coherence. And of course, if you have a bunch of neurons doing the same thing at the same time, then at a greater scale, there's more coherence. And that's, I'm not sure how you could, you know, you'd have to try to tie in like brain signals or something. I just yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. I'm just confident that consciousness is a field. Okay, so the next thing is quality and quantity. So there are different experiences. There are different kinds of experiences, and that you could view like different qualia. And that's a perfect word, qualia, because it has to do with quality rather than quantity. It's not a quantity. There's both quality and quantity. So like a good feel, like sweetness. Let's just stick with sweetness. That's a good one. I think that there is a qualia that you could call sweetness that is distinct from other qualia. And in the context of this one qualia, sweetness, there are quantities of it. There are levels of sweetness. Meaning, there are greater levels of coherence of sweetness, like the sweetness field. And there are lower levels of coherence of the sweetness field. Okay, there's qualities and there's quantities. Personally, I'm of the opinion that the different qualities or qualia are simply different angles of loxodromes within the collection of forces. So I think that you could say, if you said sweetness field, then I would say that sweetness field is, you know, random number here, 42 degrees or something. It would probably be between 0 and 90 degrees. So I'm just, you know, a random number. 42.753 degrees or whatever is sweetness. So that would be a quality. But then there's quantity. So what I mean by quantity is that there are differing levels of coherence within one's brain, and therefore differing levels of consciousness. And it's always fluctuating everywhere all the time, even within your own brain. And it's self-similar and hierarchical, cycles within cycles. So for instance, you know, there's a certain time period during which you sleep, and you have a decreased coherence, decreased consciousness compared to when you're awake. And then while you're sleeping, there are ups and downs within that time period. And then within those time periods, there are ups and downs. I mean, just look at any EEG. Up and down, up and down. And then if you take a step back, some people generally have a larger quantity, just by a little bit, a tiny bit, a larger quantity of coherence. And it's partially it's due to literally brain mass, like the amount of brain mass, the size of one's skull. And there are differences between the races, and so there's slight, of course, if you're talking about a single race, there's a bell curve, statistical. It's not just about race. That's just one variable that you could hone in on. But no matter how you look at it, it's going to be the same thing. Like you can say, oh, women are here, men are here, people who are capable of sailing a boat versus people who are not capable of sailing a boat. Yeah, you're gonna have the same thing. It doesn't matter, however you look at it. there's bell curves, or there's spaced apart depending on what boxes you put people into. So yeah, I'm talking about intelligence. There are actual quantities of intelligence, and that goes against our you're not allowed to say stuff like that in our culture today, that there are actual quantities of intelligence. And of course, within that single person, that there is a level of fluctuation too. On a lifelong scale, there's ups and downs in intelligence. Whether you look at it from like whatever they ate that day versus whatever they ate on Tuesday versus Saturday, or you could look at it from a developmental perspective. Maybe when you're around 8 years old, you have a really big brain and a lot is going on, but maybe it's not that coherent. And so as you go through the process of pruning, once you're the age of 26 or something, then that's probably like the optimal level of coherence. So generally in your mid 20s, you're going to have, compared to like when you're 80, you're going to have more coherence, more intelligent. Yeah, so there's different quantities. And the way that I view the near-death experience is that it is a sharp increase in coherence. Therefore, one could reasonably say that during the near-death experience, a person is super intelligent. And then afterwards, you go back to being dumb. No, like, you see what I mean, though? There's quantities. There's different quantities. There are levels of quantities of coherence within the brain. So, I want to wrap this up. The the near-death experience or the out-of-body experience, a lot of times people view it as like you're opening some kind of portal, or you're traveling around in the spirit realm in your ethereal body. Like you're actually traveling around. Um, and people say, oh, like I actually like felt myself going through the wall, and I saw, in the other room, and yeah, okay, you can, yeah, it's, you had that experience. I'm not saying you didn't have that experience. What I'm saying is that dualism is incorrect and monism is correct. And therefore, the near-death experience and the out-of-body experience is not some kind of portal that you travel through to access the like another dimension or another realm. Um, reality is not an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Um, as much as we all wish that it was, it's not. Okay, and you know, and yeah. Get your stuff together. Um, if you're gonna make claims about stuff like this, you're gonna swagger on in, sling some claims around confidently. You have to know what the heck you're talking about. And most people, they just say things and believe things and do things without having any reason. So stop that, you dummy. All right. Shalom.